Kabage, and as Christy mentioned, I am a former recurrent C. difficile patient of Dr. Quartz. As we've seen, who isn't a patient of Dr. Quartz? But I've also been a researcher at the University of Minnesota for almost 14 years now. My career actually started in pediatric cancer research, and then about 8 years ago when I had my fecal transplant to cure me of my C. diff infection, it was kind of a no-brainer to switch career choices and move into the field of microbiome research. 2 years ago, I had shared my story at an ACT fundraiser, but tonight I'm here to talk about some of the most meaningful work I've been able to be part of over the last couple of years. I have had the pleasure of working with 3 really wonderful families, each of whom have a child with autism spectrum disorder. I have never worked in autism and definitely am not an expert in this field, but thankfully Arizona State University, who is one of our collaborators, has been leading microbiome research in autism across the country and have very established research protocols. So by using their protocols, I applied to the FDA for each of these 3 families to get access to fecal microbiota transplant treatment for their children. And it was a success. I've been able to treat all 3 children. One of the families is here from the Twin Cities area, whose son was 5 years old when we began treatment. The second family is from Illinois, and their daughter was 11 years old. And the third family from New Jersey with an 8-year-old daughter. 2 of the families have given me permission to share some of their stories with you tonight. So our youngest child, the 5-year-old boy, after getting his microbiota transplant, his mother would send me updates, and almost instantly, she saw improvements in his GI symptoms. He was having healthy, regular bowel movements, which he had never had in his life. He was sleeping better. He was more alert, aware, less cloudy. He was more conversational, more social. My favorite day was the day when she sent me an email of videos of her son, and one was prior to starting treatment, and one was after. And it was him showing me how he would play with his peers. In the first video, he was next to a lot of other children, but he really played by himself and kind of looked off into the distance a lot. In the second video, after starting microbiota transplant therapy, he was engaging with other children. But not only that, he was actually initiating play with these kids. And I probably watched these videos a dozen times or so, just watching this very distinct difference in this little boy's demeanor at 5 years old. I'm becoming quite emotional watching these, and I couldn't imagine how the parents felt. As Dr. Quartz mentioned before, there are no medication therapies for autism, and these families feel very desperate. So to watch your 5-year-old little boy play with other kids for the first time is quite remarkable. And not only do I have these videos and stories the families give me, but through these protocols, we do a lot of measurements. We do behavioral measurements, we collect their microbiome data. We want to make sure, is this actually working? Or are these just stories the parents are telling me? So with this little boy, because it's been so long since we treated him, we actually have a lot of long-term data. And through some of these autism measurements they use, we've been able to see this drastic change, and the mother shared this with me. The social responsiveness scale is a tool they use in autism to see how a child responds in social activities. Prior to his treatment, he was in the severe range. And after 1 year after treatment, he was scoring in the mild range and was actually 1 point away from being in the normal range. And the childhood autism rating scale just is another tool used to look at autism symptoms in general. And he was initially being scaled in the moderate symptoms, and 1 year after treatment was in the mild to almost no symptoms range. And so I can only imagine, how the family feels about seeing this change in their 5-year-old little boy. And so on to my 8-year-old girl in New Jersey. She just started her treatment therapy this past March, so we're only about 6 months past her treatment, and her mother sends me almost monthly updates, which I love. Same as before, she saw instantaneous improvement in the GI symptoms. Her daughter had struggled with chronic constipation, often going many days without a bowel movement. And again, as Dr. Quartz mentioned, if these kids are struggling with GI symptoms so badly and can't communicate that, that has to be contributing to some of these behavioral issues. So she told me her daughter was very excited about this new regularity she was having. All of a sudden she was going every day, and she was really excited. They also saw that she had had abdominal distension her entire life, looking like she was constantly bloated, that just disappeared and has continued to be that way 6 months later. She started to have a more diverse diet, getting the liking to beans and lentils. But the biggest thing the parents really kept focusing on, what they would send me emails about, was about this independence this little 8-year-old girl was feeling. She started getting dressed on her own to surprise her parents. And it started by her parents picking out her clothes, and she would actually be able to get dressed. This was a child at 8 who had never been able to put on her own clothes, and was now all of a sudden doing this. And then one day, out of nowhere, while her mother was helping her younger brother, she actually went to her own dresser and picked out her clothes. The mother didn't even know that her daughter had an awareness of where her socks were located or where her pants were located. But finally, for the first time, she could actually go and do all this on her own. She also started putting on her shoes and heading into the backyard to go play on the swing set by herself. And the family has chimes on their doors, and so the first time they heard the chimes ring, both parents had made a mad dash frantically to see what was going on, and there was their daughter in the backyard laughing and playing on the swing set. And they continually sent me messages about how they could tell she was aware of this new independence she had and how proud she was that she could do things on her own for the first time. Months later, this independence continued to flourish, and I get another story about how she's taking orange juice out of the refrigerator to pour herself a cup, and how one day she spilled and her mother was waiting in the room to see how she'd handle it, and she would just calmly got some paper towels and clean it up with it and say, this is again something that this 8-year-old girl would have never known how to do. And the last story that was recently shared with me is she now can just go to the bathroom by herself and actually demands her privacy from her parents. And anyone who has kids, like, you know that in those years of toddlers, you're there all the time with these kids. And to think that you have an 8-year-old that still needs you all the time, and all of a sudden 6 months later after this therapy, they're doing all these things by themselves. The mother continues to share these stories, and the parents cannot be happier with what they've seen in their daughter. So I brought up my previous research in pediatric cancer research for a reason, because when I worked in that field, I was often asked, like, how can you do this work? I could never do this. It's so heartbreaking. It's so sad to work with kids with cancer. And it wasn't easy. Many of those years, I had a lot of kids who did die of their cancer in my studies. But despite all of those tragedies, I always felt very inspired in the work. Kids are resilient, I think far more so than adults when it comes to facing difficulties. But the parents of these children are really amazing too. When your child is ill, nothing else in the world matters. You will do whatever it takes to help give your child a better life. And these families with children in autism have no other option. This therapy is their hope. The Arizona State University trials have been so successful, they have wait lists of hundreds of thousands of families trying to get their children in to these trials. And that's why we have been contacted by some of these families to do these individual treatments, because they want hope. We all know what that's like. When a loved one is sick, the stresses of the world, big or small, can fade into the background, because all we do is hope for their suffering and their struggling to come to an end. And that's the mission of Achieving Cures Together. It's giving people hope. And so I thank you for being here tonight and supporting ACT. We couldn't do our work without all of you, without ACT. And we couldn't give all of this hope to people without this wonderful organization, without your support. Thank you.